It is extremely important to get our perspective right, particularly at the time of this pandemic. If we look at last 2000 years of history, we would see a history of population control and eugenics program that was thriving for all these years. Welcome to a new episode of Alternative Perspective. Kindly get your perspective right and view this particular pandemic from the point of view or from the angle or from the perspective of population control and eugenics program. Let's begin by exposing the sick mentality of these ruling elites. These ruling elites belong to the Judeo-Christian Anglo-American Western hegemony. These are essentially trillionaires, or for that matter zillionaires, Jews and crypto-Jews oligarchs, and they're at the center of this Judeo-Christian Anglo-American Western hegemony. They consider themselves as chosen people of God, and this sick mentality is at the heart of racism, casteism, supremacism, fascism, untouchability, and countless number of wars. This sick mentality is at the heart of British and American imperialism. Nearly 2,400 years ago, in ancient Greece, Plato stressed upon the need of population control in his famous work, The Republic. His disciple, Aristotle, proposed deeply disturbing ideas such as abortion and infanticide as methods of population control. In our countries or elsewhere, these people, such as Plato or Aristotle, have almost gained the demigod status. However, you need to understand that these people actually proposed deeply disturbing ideas such as infanticide or abortion as methods of population control. The word eugenics derives its origin from the Greek word eugenes, which means of noble birth. That is, eugenics talks about the cultivation of a human race of noble bloodline, that is, of noble birth. Thus, I repeat once more, eugenics talks about the cultivation of a human race of noble birth, that is, of noble bloodline. It completely disregards the socio-economic condition in which a man finds himself when he opens his eyes. This notorious idea essentially is not a science, but rather a pseudoscience. This doesn't have really a scientific basis. This is a hypocrisy, and this essentially is a self-serving justification of the ruling elites of the world. Let's understand this sick mentality once more. This rich and powerful ruling elite think that they are successful not because of the massive wealth that they inherited, not because of the fraud, treachery they committed in their business, not because of their shady business dealings, not because of their oppression and subjugation of masses, not because of the socio-political subversion they were part of, but because of their superior gene. This essentially is a sick mentality. Have you ever thought the kind of subjugation the Indian people had to undergo during the time of British Raj? Well, the British East India Company essentially was an offshoot trading organization of Anglo-Dutch banking empire. Naturally, question comes, who owned this Anglo-Dutch banking empire? Who owned this British East India Company, or for that matter, other East India companies which operated in India, Indochina, and in Africa? Well, these owners were essentially the ruling elites of today. These essentially are the bunch of Jews and crypto-Jews oligarchs who are at the heart of the Judeo-Christian Anglo-American Western hegemony. Fast forward in the Middle Ages, from ancient Greece, where the idea of eugenics actually evolved. Machiavelli opined that an increase in human population is problematic, and inevitable outcome is the purging of the human population, and this is something which is said in his famous work Discourses on the First Decade of Titus Livius. These so-called chosen people of God think that one of the 5 different methods can be adopted as a means of population purging. These are flood, famine, epidemic. He actually mentioned the word plague rather than epidemic, war, and genocide. Fast forward into the modern ages. Thomas R. Malthus, an eugenist and a white supremacist from the Church of England, wrote an essay on the principle of population. He advocated the use of methods such as flood, famine, epidemic, war, or genocide in order to increase the death rate. He calls it positive checks, and he considers that the human misery is the necessary and inevitable consequence. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, where he talked about the implication of population control. However, his cousin Francis Galton became obsessed with the idea of eugenics and proposed the cultivation of a master human race in his famous work Inquiries into Human Faculty and its Development. Soon after this, the eugenics program in the West started to receive massive funding and grants from the Rockefeller family. Rockefellers happen to be one of the major families that are part of the ruling elites. Throughout the last century and period leading up to the Second World War and beyond, Rockefellers heavily funded the eugenics program in the West. Whether it is American Eugenics Society, whether it is Planned Parenthood program by Margaret Sanger, or whether it is Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany, or for that matter, Cold Spring Harbor in the United States of America. As a result, eugenics movement gathered its momentum in early 19th century and started to become part of academia in the Western universities. Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany and Cold Spring Harbor in the United States of America rejected the idea that all humans are born equal and started to propagate the idea of cultivating a master race of noble birth, that is of noble bloodline. Award-winning American author Edwin Black exposes this notorious agenda of eugenics in his famous work War Against the Weak, Eugenics and America's Campaign to Create a Master Race. Edwin Black also authored IBM and the Holocaust. This is something which you are going to see next. In its infamous 1927 decision, US Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes writes, "It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offsprings for crime or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit for continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough." It is these ideas of supremacism and racial superiority that culminated into the fascist ideologies that plunged the globe into the dark days of Second World War. Well, the Second World War had many different agendas. One of these many agendas was an eugenist experimentation and depopulation of people whom they considered were not of their kind, that is, not of the kind of the ruling elite or superior race. During the Second World War, Nazis committed genocide of massive proportion. Nazis slaughtered Roma people of Indian origin. Let me tell you that Roma are basically tribes of Indian origin who are basically the early Indo-Europeans and nothing else. The word Romania actually derives its origin from the word Roma. And these people were slaughtered by the Nazis in Czechoslovakia, in Hungary, and in Romania in large numbers. Nazis slaughtered the Slavic people, that is the Slavs, the native people of Russia and Eastern Europe, and Nazis slaughtered the Africans and Asians residing in the Europe. During the Second World War, Nazi psychiatrist and eugenist Ernst Rudin was chiefly responsible for the forced sterilization and clinical killing campaign of the adults and children in Nazi Germany. Ernst Rudin actually was the one who drafted the forced sterilization law of Nazi Germany. He and his Kaiser Wilhelm Institute was actually funded by the Rockefeller Foundation from the United States of America. Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939. This is something which is known as Operation Blitzkrieg. With Operation Blitzkrieg and the invasion of Poland, Second World War started. Thomas J. Watson Sr., president of IBM, who later incorporated IBM, that is International Business Machine, set up a subsidiary in Poland called Watson Business Machine to assist Nazi invasion of Poland. Nazis slaughtered countless number of Slavic people and the Romas in Poland. This entire operation, this entire eugenist experimentation was actually managed from IBM's global headquarters at New York, USA. During Nuremberg trials, Nazis quoted Oliver Wendell Holmes, that is the US Supreme Court Justice, in their own defense. Nazis claimed that their eugenics program is actually being run from or actually being monitored from the United States. The question is, why was Thomas J. Watson was not charged with crime against humanity? Why IBM Corporation was not banned? Questions galore. Roughly during the same time, Planned Parenthood program was set up by Margaret Sanger in the United States of America. Thomas J. Watson's granddaughter, Janet Watson, married Margaret Sanger's grandson, Alexander Sanger. And let me tell you that this person called Alexander Sanger, even today, is the president of the Planned Parenthood. This picture actually portrays the relation between the two families, that is the Margaret Sanger's family and Thomas J. Watson's family. Kindly note that Margaret Sanger's grandson, that is Alexander Sanger, got married to Janet Watson, who happens to be the granddaughter of Thomas J. Watson, that is that IBM president who actually helped the Nazis in their eugenics program, in their depopulation program. We have already seen that Margaret Sanger set up this Planned Parenthood program in the United States with funding and grants from the Rockefellers. Exactly in the same manner, Rockefellers also funded the American Eugenics Society. Leading up to the World War II, American eugenists took sterilization initiatives and euthanasia programs in a clever way, in a subtle way, against African Americans, Hispanics, against Asian immigrants, and Red Indians, that is, the Native Americans, whom they considered undesirable and unfit. They also influenced the fitter family movements for better babies, which essentially means the babies who would actually fit into their kind, that is the kind of the world elites or the ruling elites. In reality, there was hardly any difference between the American and Nazi eugenics program. What Nazis did in a crude, cruel manner, Americans did that in a shrewd and subtle way, that is in a clever and calculated way. Gas chambers and compulsory sterilizations were replaced by cleverly run euthanasia programs and selective sterilization programs using doctors and hospitals and medications. There are many recorded incidents. In one such incident, the patients from the African American community or from the Asian community were fed with milk that was actually infected with tuberculosis bacteria, that is Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which enhanced the death rate of these patients. Let's summarize the sick mentality of the ruling elites. They are keen to create a society with people of their kind, that is only the rich and wealthy were to be allowed to procreate. These ruling elites considered the rest of the humanity as useless eaters, unwanted creatures, undesirable, unfit, or cancer towards the entire human society. They think that these undesirable people must not be allowed to procreate, that is, their generation must be stopped. Apart from these ruling elites, such as Rothschilds and Rockefellers, several different renowned public figures and politicians also expressed this notorious and nefarious idea of eugenics, their support towards this notorious and nefarious idea of eugenics. These people include Winston Churchill, former British Prime Minister, Theodore Roosevelt, former American President, Julian Huxley, noted British biologist, H.G. Wells, noted author. All these people were actually proponents of this sick mentality. Let us now listen to William Engdahl, what he had to say at Open Mind Conference in 2013. William Engdahl happens to be a noted historian and scholar on economic matters.
A fascination that very, very powerful and very bad people like the Rockefellers had since they became the world's wealthiest people. A fascination with something called eugenics. How many of you are familiar with what eugenics is all about? Well, for those of you who aren't, eugenics is so-called race breeding science. You have a superior race like the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds as they see it, not as I see it, but as they see it. And then you have the unwanted, the human cancer, as one of their people called it. The human cancer that spreads, reproduces. So, after the end of World War II, the Rockefellers became one of the largest financial patrons of something called the American Eugenics Society. And a very, very close family friend of the Rockefeller family, Margaret Sanger, created the Planned Parenthood Federation, which was nothing but a disguised form of eugenics. And during the 30s, she went into Harlem, which is a black ghetto in New York City, and created something called the Negro Project. She wrote in a letter to a friend that somehow leaked into the public domain, fortunately. She said, "If the black ministers ever get wind of the fact that the Negro Project is about reducing the black population, or the Negro population as it was called then our project is in real trouble." That was eugenics.
At this time of pandemic, we must analyze everything from the correct perspective. We must understand that the ancestors of Bill Gates were long connected with population control program and eugenics program. We must understand that the name of Bill Gates' grandfather, William Henry Gates I, appeared in the roster of the American Eugenics Society. Bill Gates' father, William Henry Gates II, was the head of Planned Parenthood set up by Margaret Sanger with fundings from the Rockefeller Foundation. Bill Gates' mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, happens to be the scion of extremely rich Maxwell banking family, and it was she who actually persuaded former CEO of IBM, that is International Business Machine, John Opel, who actually obliged her by helping her son to set up Microsoft Corporation. We must look at Bill Gates and his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the vaccine alliance called Gavi from the correct perspective. Else, it might just be a blunder.